In tonight's news edition, in talks with the U.S. Secretary of State, His Majesty the King urges stepped-up efforts to revive Palestinian-Israeli peace talks. The Prime Minister says Jordan is a cradle of religions and part of the Christian heritage, and the Pope's upcoming visit sends a message on that status. And the turmoil in Libya deepens as explosions and fighting erupt in the capital. Good evening and welcome to the news at 10. During his visit to the United States, His Majesty the King discussed with Secretary of State John Kerry efforts to bring about peace in the Middle East and the Syrian crisis. During last night's meeting, His Majesty stressed the need to step up efforts to resume Palestinian-Israeli peace talks. Negotiations, he said, should address all final status issues leading to an independent and viable Palestinian state on 1967 borders with East Jerusalem as its capital. The King spoke of the importance of continued U.S. engagement as a sponsor of the peace process. He pledged Jordan will continue its efforts to work and coordinate with various parties involved to achieve a lasting and comprehensive solution to the Palestinian cause, which is the core issue in the region. King Abdullah also emphasized a comprehensive political solution to the Syrian crisis to end the suffering of the country's people and safeguard its territorial integrity. The monarch also warned of the repercussions of the crisis on the region. He spoke about the burdens Jordan shoulders for hosting a large number of Syrian refugees, which increased pressure on its infrastructure and services. King Abdullah also received a telephone call from United Nations Secretary General Ban Ki-moon. They discussed developments in the Middle East, especially the repercussions of the Syrian crisis, as well as efforts to achieve regional peace. His Majesty stressed United Nations backing for efforts to reach solutions to challenges facing the Middle East, namely the Syrian crisis, whose ramifications are getting worse inside and outside Syria. During the telephone call, King Abdullah reiterated Jordan's support for a political solution to the Syrian crisis to put an end to the suffering of its people. The UN chief also praised Jordan's contribution in international peacekeeping missions in various troubled spots. Prime Minister Abdullah Mansour said Jordan is a key part of the Christian heritage and holds Pope Francis in high esteem as a global symbol of peace. Jordan, he said, has the privilege of welcoming the pontiff on his upcoming pilgrimage to the Holy Land, which comes in the first year of his election to the papacy. Mansour spoke as he toured a media center at the Royal Cultural Center that provides various services for over 1,000 journalists who will cover the visit that starts on Saturday. Mansour, accompanied by the Ministers of Interior, Labor and Tourism and Antiquities, and State Minister for Media Affairs, was briefed on the logistical and media facilities at the center. Among these are high-speed internet and press conferences rooms, large screens to display the Pope's activities, studios for Jordan Television, the official broadcaster of the Pope's visit, original videos, and background information on papal visits to the kingdom. Mansour told reporters that Jordan is a cradle of the three monotheistic faiths that are bound by the human and ethical values of tolerance, peace, justice, and equality. He said Pope Francis's presence among Jordanians is a source of pride and joy for them, urging the kingdom's people to accord the Pope the kind of welcome commensurate with his stature. Meanwhile, Royal Court Chief Fayez Tarawne toured the Jordan Valley baptism site, the highlight of Pope Francis' pilgrimage to the Holy Land, which starts here in Jordan on Saturday. Tarawne, accompanied by top officials, checked on preparations in place and facilities made ready to welcome the pontiff on his historic trip. Among these are logistical and media services that will be available for journalists from Jordan, the Middle East, and the world, who will provide live and online coverage of this exceptional religious event. Baptism Site Commission Director Diya Madani briefed the Royal Court Chief on measures taken to welcome the Pope, starting with his arrival and through his schedule at the various religious sites. At the Jordan River baptism site, Pope Francis will meet children with special needs and refugees from Syria and Iraq. Meanwhile, State Minister for Media Affairs and Communications Mohammed Al-Momani said the upcoming papal visit has special importance and multiple dimensions at all levels. Addressing a joint press conference with Minister of Tourism and Antiquities Nidal Qatamin and official spokesperson of the Catholic Church Rifat Badr, Momani said the visit comes at a time when Jordan is known for its initiatives that have helped achieve religious tolerance. The visit, he added, will also underline Jordan's security and stability. Momani pointed to the positive impact of the visit on the tourism and economic sectors, as many Arabs and foreigners will visit the kingdom during the pontiff's pilgrimage. The tourism minister pointed to the positive indicators in tourism and economic sectors that will improve Jordan's position on the world tourism map. At the Vatican, Pope Francis asked for prayers for his upcoming three-day visit to the Holy Land. During his trip to Jordan, Jerusalem, and the Palestinian territories, Pope Francis will meet with the leaders of Orthodox Christians' Ecumenical Patriarch Bartholomew I. Pope Francis was addressing a crowd in his weekly audience at St. Peter's Square in the Vatican.
Sarà un viaggio
Next Saturday, I will go to the Holy Land, the land of Jesus. It will be a strictly religious visit. Firstly, to meet with my brother Bartholomew I, to mark the 50th anniversary of the meeting between Paul VI and Atenagora I. Paul and Andrea will meet again another time, and this is really beautiful. The second reason is to pray for peace in that land, which suffers greatly. I ask you to pray for my visit.
In his address, the Pope also said his thoughts are with the victims of massive flooding in Bosnia and Serbia and called for the international community to provide concrete help. The Libyan High Electoral Commission set parliamentary elections for the 25th of June amid a worsening security situation in the country. The election will lead to the replacement of the National General Congress, which is loathed by a large section of the population that accuses it of leading the country to a dead end. We get more on the crisis in Libya in this report.
Explosions and fighting erupted in Libya's capital, killing at least 2 people. Earlier, a rocket attack on the southwestern district of Tripoli killed at least 2 people.
Yesterday at midnight we heard explosions, so we rushed outside to see what was happening. We found out that our shops were burnt out and we evacuated 2 wounded people.
The violence came after the top air commander signaled support for a renegade general who is campaigning to dissolve parliament and wipe out Islamists. It was not immediately clear who was behind the fighting, but the government has become increasingly alarmed by signs of a growing support for General Khalifa Haftar. Western powers fear Haftar's bid to persuade army units to join his campaign will split the military and trigger more turmoil in the country. Compounding the political chaos, the state news agency said the Interior Ministry had also joined Haftar, but the report was dismissed minutes later by the acting Interior Minister. The Arab League voiced concern over the Libyan unrest and stressed the need for political solutions. The League's Secretary General representative for Libya, Nasser Al-Qudwa, said the pan-Arab organization's help is available but entirely dependent on the will of the Libyan people. He said the situation in Libya had seriously deteriorated.
That's why we are concerned. That's why we are conducting those consultations with Libyans and non-Libyan officials, especially Arabs. And that's why we are calling for an end of the military confrontation and military actions, and calling for a return to the dialogue and to attempt to reach general understandings, to reach consensus among all the parties on how to get out of the difficulties Libya is facing.
The early parliamentary vote was announced in an attempt to ease pressure from many Libyans frustrated over the country's chaotic transition towards democracy since the 2011 uprising that ousted Muammar al-Gaddafi. Hiba Al-Atoum for the news at 10.
A bomb blast in a district of Syria's northern city of Aleppo caused damage and turned its infrastructure into ruins. Further south in the small town of Nawa in Dir'a, explosions and thick black smoke filled the air after government shelling. Shelling was also reported in a town near Hama, where a rebel missile hit a government tank. Also in Hama, a video showed a rebel fighter loading a mortar launcher and firing at a government truck on a rural road. As fighting raged, the Red Cross began a major distribution of emergency food shares on both sides of the front lines in Aleppo. The Syrian government finally gave approval this week for the plan to feed 60,000 people in the divided northern city. An Egyptian court sentenced ousted President Hosni Mubarak to 3 years in prison on charges of stealing public funds. Mubarak is also accused in 2 other cases of corruption that have yet to come to court. Judicial sources said the 23 months Mubarak had spent in jail since the 2011 uprising up until August, when he left prison on house arrest, would be applied against the sentence. This means the former president will probably serve no more than a year as punishment for the corruption charges. His sons will also have to serve only 1 more year to complete their sentence. Security was tight outside the court, where supporters of the 86-year-old Mubarak protested the sentence. The state newspaper Al-Ahram reported that the court had ordered Mubarak transferred to Tora prison, where his sons are jailed. His health may mean that he will be held at the prison's hospital. 4 other defendants in the case were acquitted. Russia said troops deployed for exercises near the Ukrainian border had dismantled equipment and were moving to train stations and airfields for return to their permanent bases. But NATO said it saw no sign of a pullout. In the meantime, Moscow vowed to retaliate against what it called unfounded U.S. sanctions imposed a day earlier on 12 Russians for human rights abuses. This report has more.
Russian President Vladimir Putin issues the latest warning to Ukraine. He said it would be hard for Moscow to build relations with Ukrainian leaders who come to power while fighting persists in the country's east. It was the latest in a string of comments from Moscow, casting doubt on the legitimacy of a presidential election scheduled for Sunday. The Russian leader also said it would be more logical for Kiev to hold the vote after a referendum on a new constitution. U.S. Vice President Joe Biden cautioned Moscow that undermining the May 25th election in Ukraine would bring greater costs for Russia. Ukraine and NATO were amongst the topics discussed during Biden's meetings with the Romanian President Traian Băsescu and Prime Minister Victor Ponta.
The President and I have agreed that if Russia undermines these elections on Sunday, we must remain resolute in imposing greater cost on Russia. And we must be equally resolute in reinvesting in the NATO alliance. In that spirit, we spoke about the ongoing, urgent U.S. and NATO efforts to step up our military presence in Central and Eastern Europe, in the air, on the ground, and at sea.
In Donetsk, a Ukrainian tycoon who enjoys huge authority in the region, Rinat Akhmetov, accused the self-proclaimed Donetsk People's Republic of deceiving the people of the region. His full support for the Kiev authorities had been in doubt until recently, giving his past association with ousted Moscow-backed President Viktor Yanukovych. After more than a decade of negotiations, Putin and his Chinese counterpart Xi Jinping signed off on a huge gas deal worth as much as $400 billion. The deal is a political triumph for Putin, who is courting new partners in Asia as customers in Europe attempt to reduce their reliance on Russian gas to bolster their bargaining positions with Moscow after its seizure of Crimea from Ukraine. Loy Balgar for the news at 10.
The militant group Boko Haram has been accused of killing at least 17 people in an attack on a village in northeast Nigeria. It comes a day after 118 people died in a double bombing in the central city of Jos, also blamed on Boko Haram. In the latest attack, the fighters reportedly spent hours killing and looting in the village of Alagarno, from where 200 schoolgirls were abducted by the militant groups last month. The abductions caused international outrage and prompted foreign powers to send military advisors to assist Nigeria's army. The San Antonio Spurs made the most of home court advantage as they delivered a superb offensive display to beat the Oklahoma City Thunder 122-105 in game one of the Western Conference Finals. Though the Spurs had lost all 4 of their regular season games to the Thunder, they lived up to their status as the top seeds in the conference and dominated in the paint to take a 1-0 lead in the best-of-7 series. All-star forward Tim Duncan scored a team-high 27 points, and Manu Ginobili weighed in with 18 for the Spurs, while Kevin Durant led Oklahoma City with 28 points and Russell Westbrook put up 25 and 7 assists. Game 2 will be played in San Antonio before the series shifts to Oklahoma City.
But by doing so, you're giving the best offensive team in the league a lot of free looks around the paint.
Tim Duncan with 17 points. Here comes Green. He pulls it up.
The rival of the World Cup trophy to Belém, the 21st stop on the tour of Brazil, inspired a violent protest. The protest broke out at the Liberto Gallery in the center of Belém, where crowds of people were lining up to take photos with the trophy. The complaint of the protesters centered on the rise of bus fares before the World Cup Games. The protest began peacefully with demonstrators using drums and banners. The action became more violent as the evening went on, with protesters throwing stones, invading the gallery, and clashing with the military police. The trophy was moved from the gallery for safekeeping and continued its tour to Teresina. And finally, chilly and cloudy tonight in most areas with a slight chance for light rains, especially in the eastern regions. Tomorrow, a slight drop in temperatures expected, therefore it will be fair across the country. Winds will be northwesterly moderate, turning dusty in the Badia regions. The Gulf of Aqaba should expect warm conditions and cloudy skies with southerly moderate winds and slightly choppy seas. Next are the lows and highs for tonight and tomorrow. To end the news, here's a reminder of our top stories. In talks with the U.S. Secretary of State, His Majesty the King urges stepped-up efforts to revive Palestinian-Israeli peace talks. The Prime Minister says Jordan is a cradle of religions and part of the Christian heritage, and the Pope's upcoming visit sends a message on that status. And the turmoil in Libya deepens as explosions and fighting erupts in the capital. With that, we come to the end of tonight's news. I'm Nancy Khair. Thank you for watching. Have a good night.